My name is Elena, and I'm 27 years old. My husband forced me to serve drinks to his mistress at a charity gala, right in front of people who used to respect me. I stood there shaking, smiling through humiliation, until his biggest billionaire investor walked in, bowed to me, and called me boss. Before I tell you how the room went silent after that, hit that subscribe button and comment where you're watching from, because this story is about power no one saw coming. You want to know what real pain feels like? It's not the sharp cut of betrayal, it's the slow burn of watching yourself disappear piece by piece while everyone applauds the man who's erasing you. That's what happened to me for 3 years of marriage to Marcus Caldwell. Marcus wasn't born into wealth. He clawed his way up through charm, connections, and strategic marriages. When we met, I was already successful, already had my own foundation, my own investments, my own voice in rooms that mattered. But love makes you stupid, doesn't it? Love makes you think that stepping back is the same as stepping up for someone else. I watched him use my contacts to build his empire. I watched him take credit for strategies I whispered to him over breakfast. I watched him smile and nod when other men talked business, knowing he'd come home and ask me what they really meant. And I gave him everything, because I thought that's what wives do. I thought that's what love looked like. The mistress wasn't a secret. That's what made it worse. Her name was Vivian, and she was everything I wasn't allowed to be anymore. Loud, demanding, present. She showed up to our events on his arm while I stayed home. She posted pictures from restaurants I used to love while I ate dinner alone. She wore jewelry that looked suspiciously like pieces from my collection that had mysteriously gone missing. But the night of the Caldwell Foundation charity gala, yes, the foundation that bore his name but was built on my money, that night he crossed a line I didn't even know existed. "You'll serve tonight," he said, not looking up from his phone. "The staff is short and Vivian needs to see that you understand your place in this marriage." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to look up and say he was joking. But Marcus hadn't joked with me in months. Marcus barely looked at me unless he needed something. "Serve?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "The drinks, the appetizers, whatever needs doing." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were cold, empty. "Unless you think you're too good for honest work?" The charity gala was supposed to be our night. Our foundation, helping underprivileged children get access to education. I'd started that foundation with my own money, my own vision, my own hands, but somewhere along the way it became his foundation, his vision, his legacy. I should have said no. I should have walked out right then. But when you've been ground down so slowly, so methodically, you forget what your own voice sounds like. You forget that you have the right to use it. So I put on the black uniform he'd laid out for me. I pinned my hair back. I slipped my wedding ring off my finger and put it in my jewelry box because even I wasn't cruel enough to wear it while serving drinks to the woman sleeping with my husband. Actually, that's a lie. I left it on. I wanted people to see it. I wanted them to see exactly how far I'd fallen. The ballroom was magnificent that night. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tables draped in white silk. The city's elite mingled in designer gowns and tailored suits. Champagne flutes catching the light as they laughed and posed for society photographers. This was my world once. These were my people. Now I was invisible to them, carrying a silver tray and avoiding eye contact. Marcus stood near the main stage in his perfectly fitted tuxedo, one hand on Vivian's lower back as she leaned into him, laughing at something someone had said. She wore red, blood red, with diamonds at her throat that caught the light every time she threw her head back. She looked like a woman who'd won something. I approached their circle with a tray of champagne, my hands steady despite the rage burning in my chest. This was what he wanted. This was his revenge for whatever sins he'd decided I'd committed by existing, by having opinions, by being more than just an accessory to his ambition. "Champagne?" I offered, my voice professionally neutral. Vivian turned, her smile sharp as glass. "Oh, how lovely. You're so good at this, Elena. Really, you should consider it as a career change." The group around them shifted uncomfortably. These were people who knew me, who'd attended dinner parties at my home, who'd written checks to my foundation. Now they were watching me serve drinks to my husband's mistress and they didn't know where to look. Marcus didn't even glance at me. That hurt more than Vivian's words. I was so beneath his notice that he couldn't be bothered to acknowledge my humiliation. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, refilling glasses, clearing plates, becoming part of the furniture. People whispered as I passed. Phones came out. I knew by morning, pictures of Marcus Caldwell's wife serving drinks at her own charity gala would be all over social media. The story would write itself. Socialite falls from grace, or power wife reduced to service. And the worst part of me wondered if I deserved it. If maybe I really had become too comfortable, too demanding, too present in a marriage where my husband clearly wanted me absent. But then something inside me started to shift. As I watched Marcus accept congratulations for the foundation's success, as I watched Vivian play hostess at an event I'd planned down to the napkin colors, as I watched my guests, my friends, pretend not to see me, the pain began to crystallize into something harder, something colder, because they didn't know. None of them knew what I'd really given up, what I'd really sacrificed, what I was still capable of. If you're feeling that burn in your chest right now, that recognition of what it feels like to be erased by someone who should protect you, hit subscribe and comment your location. I want to know where my fellow survivors are watching from, because this story gets so much better. You see, when I stepped back from my career to support Marcus's rise, I didn't just quit my job. I didn't just close my office and walk away. I was smarter than that. I was more careful than that. I'd learned early in business that power isn't about the title on your door or the size of your office. Power is about who signs the checks, who holds the contracts, who controls the money when the lights go out and the cameras stop rolling. So when I stepped back, I restructured. I moved money around. I created trusts and shell companies and investment vehicles that looked like Marcus's empire but were built on my foundation. Every major contract he'd signed in the past 3 years required my signature too. Every investor he'd courted had ultimately signed agreements with companies I controlled through layers of legal entities my lawyer had crafted like Russian nesting dolls. Marcus thought he was the king because he sat on the throne, but I was the kingdom itself. The Caldwell Foundation, fully funded by my trust, his consulting business, operating with credit lines secured by my assets, the penthouse apartment where he brought Vivian, owned by a company I controlled through a trust that bore my maiden name. I'd let him play house with my money while I figured out who he really was. And tonight, watching him humiliate me in front of our peers, I finally had my answer. He was exactly the kind of man who would force his wife to serve drinks to his mistress, which meant he was exactly the kind of man who deserved to lose everything he thought he owned. The evening was winding down when the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. Conversations quieted, heads turned toward the entrance. Even the waitstaff, the real waitstaff, stopped what they were doing to look. Richard Ashford had arrived. Richard Ashford didn't just attend charity galas. Richard Ashford's presence turned charity galas into command performances. He was the kind of billionaire investor who could make or break entire industries with a phone call. The kind of man who owned senators and bought Supreme Court decisions like other people bought coffee. Marcus had been trying to get a meeting with Richard Ashford for 2 years. Every deal he'd proposed, every investment opportunity he'd pitched, every connection he'd tried to make had led back to the same goal. Getting Richard Ashford's attention, getting Richard Ashford's money. And now he was here. I watched from across the room as Marcus straightened his shoulders, as Vivian pressed closer to his side, as the crowd parted like the Red Sea to let Richard Ashford move through the ballroom. He was smaller than his reputation suggested, maybe 60 years old, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. His security detail followed at a discreet distance, but everyone could feel their presence. Marcus stepped forward, his hand extended, his smile bright and confident. This was his moment. This was what all the humiliation, all the sacrifice, all the stepping on people had been building toward. But Richard Ashford wasn't looking at Marcus. He was looking at me. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and I saw something I hadn't seen in 3 years of marriage to Marcus. I saw recognition, not just of my face, but of my worth, of my power, of who I really was underneath the server's uniform and the careful invisibility. Richard Ashford began walking toward me. The room fell silent. Marcus's smile faltered. Vivian's grip on his arm tightened. The society photographers swung their cameras around, confused about where to point them. Who was this billionaire investor walking toward? Why was he ignoring Marcus Caldwell at Marcus Caldwell's own charity gala? I set my tray down on the nearest table. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Richard Ashford stopped in front of me, the most powerful man in the room. The man every other person here would sell their soul to impress, stopped in front of the woman serving drinks and did something that made every jaw in the ballroom drop. He bowed. Not a nod, not a handshake, a bow. Deep and respectful and unmistakably deferential. "Welcome back, Princess," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Princess. That's what they called me in the investment world before I got married. Before I disappeared behind Marcus's shadow. Princess Elena, the ice queen of venture capital. The woman who could smell a bad deal from 3 rooms away and who never ever lost money on an investment. The room was so quiet I could hear champagne bubbles popping in abandoned glasses. Marcus made a sound, half laugh, half choke. "I'm sorry, Richard. I think there's been some confusion. This is my wife, Elena." She's been helping with service tonight, but... Richard Ashford turned to look at Marcus, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. When billionaires look at you like you're an insect, it's not subtle. Marcus Caldwell, Richard said, and somehow made Marcus's own name sound like an insult. Tell me, how does it feel to publicly humiliate the woman who owns 73% of everything you think you've built? The silence stretched. Someone's phone clattered to the floor. A waiter dropped a tray in the distance, but even that crash sounded muffled, unreal. Marcus's face went through several colors: confusion, realization, panic, before settling on a shade of gray that matched week-old newspaper. I don't understand, Vivian said, her voice high and sharp. Elena is just his wife. She doesn't work. She doesn't work. Richard Ashford's voice could have frozen water. This woman restructured the Asian markets in 2019. This woman predicted the tech crash of 2020 and moved $3 billion out of volatile stocks 6 months before they collapsed. This woman has been funding your boyfriend's little empire while he played dress-up as a businessman. He turned back to me, and his voice softened. Elena, I've been trying to reach you for months. Your lawyer said you were taking time for personal matters, but when I heard about tonight... He shook his head. No one treats my business partner like hired help. No one. Business partner. I hadn't used that title in 3 years, but hearing it now felt like coming home. Felt like remembering who I was before I decided that love meant making myself smaller. I looked at Marcus. Really looked at him for the first time in months. The man I'd loved enough to sacrifice everything for. The man who'd just tried to explain away my existence to a room full of people who were now realizing exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. Marcus, I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly in the silent ballroom. Take off your jacket. What? He laughed nervously. Elena, what are you? Take off your jacket. Roll up your sleeves. Psh, there are glasses that need clearing. The color drained from his face. You can't be serious. I picked up the tray I'd set down and held it out to him. You said tonight was about understanding our place in this marriage. You said it was about honest work. I smiled, and I knew it didn't reach my eyes. Well, darling, now you understand. Subscribe if this moment made your heart race. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because we're about to witness the most satisfying downfall in charity gala history. Marcus stared at the tray like I was offering him a live snake. The room held its breath. Cameras clicked, society reporters leaned forward. This was the moment that would define the rest of his life, and everyone knew it. He could take the tray, he could accept the reversal, acknowledge what I'd just revealed. Try to salvage some dignity from the wreckage of his arrogance. Or he could keep pretending he had power he'd never actually possessed. Elena, you're being ridiculous, he said, but his voice cracked on my name. Richard, surely you can see that my wife is having some kind of episode. The stress of the evening, the charity work. Your wife, Richard Ashford interrupted, owns the building we're standing in. Your wife's investment firm has been quietly acquiring controlling interests in every major deal you've touched for the past 18 months. Your wife, Mr. Caldwell, could have you evicted from your office tomorrow morning and bankrupt by lunch. He paused, letting that sink in, letting the room absorb the magnitude of Marcus's miscalculation. But more importantly, Richard continued, his voice getting softer and somehow more dangerous. Your wife is the woman who saved my daughter's life when her boarding school was held hostage by creditors. The woman who moved mountains to get those children safe. The woman I've been trying to bring back to active business because she's the best investor I've ever worked with. He looked around the room, at all the faces staring back at us in various stages of shock and dawning understanding. And you had her serving cocktails to your whore. Vivian gasped. Several society ladies clutched their pearls. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God," loud enough for everyone to hear. Marcus was sweating now. I could see it beating on his forehead under the chandelier lights. Richard, you don't understand our marriage. Elena chose to step back. She wanted to support my career. By giving you access to her money, I spoke for the first time since offering him the tray, and my voice cut through his excuses like a blade through silk. By letting you use my connections to build your reputation. By sitting quietly while you took credit for my strategies and my investments and my foundation. I stepped closer to him, still holding out the tray. You're right, Marcus. I did choose to step back. I chose to let you think you were in control while I watched what kind of man you really were. I chose to fund your success while you decided whether you were worthy of the trust I'd placed in you. The ballroom was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. And tonight, you answered that question. Marcus looked around the room, desperate for an ally. For someone to break the spell that was unraveling his entire world. but the faces staring back at him weren't sympathetic anymore. They were calculating. These people could smell blood in the water, and they were already deciding which side of this scandal they wanted to be on. "Elena," he said, and for the first time, I heard something that might have been real emotion in his voice. "Please, we can work this out. Private conversation, not here." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Marcus," I said. My voice gentle now. Soft. The way you speak to someone who's already dying. "Do you remember what you said to me 6 months ago when I suggested we might want to discuss our financial arrangements, when I tried to tell you about the companies I'd been building?" He stared at me, and I could see him trying to remember. Trying to figure out which of his casual dismissals had been the fatal one. "You said that money talk was boring, that I should leave business to people who understood it, that my job was to look pretty and let you handle the complicated stuff." His face went white. "You told me I was lucky to have married someone who could take care of me, someone who could handle the pressure of real responsibility." I held the tray out one more time. "This is real responsibility, Marcus. Take it." He didn't move, couldn't move. The weight of his own arrogance had paralyzed him, so I set the tray down on the table behind him. I untied the apron around my waist and folded it neatly. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single piece of paper, a document I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. "Richard," I said, not taking my eyes off Marcus's face, "would you mind witnessing a signature?" "Of course, Princess." I unfolded the paper and placed it on the table next to the tray. Marcus leaned forward to read it, and I watched the last of his color drain away. "Dissolution of Caldwell Enterprises, effective immediately." I read aloud for the benefit of the crowd. "All assets to revert to primary investor Elena Valdez, maiden name restored." I pulled out a pen. "The Caldwell Foundation will be restructured as the Valdez Education Initiative. The penthouse apartment reverts to its actual owner. The consulting firm's client list transfers to Valdez Investment Group, which I'll be reopening Monday morning." I signed my name with a flourish, my maiden name, the name I'd given up for love and was taking back for justice. "Oh, and Marcus? Vivian?" I looked up at them both, standing there like deer in headlights. "The apartment lease expires at midnight tonight. Security will escort you out if you're not gone by then." Vivian made a sound like a wounded animal. "You can't do this. Marcus, tell her she can't do this." But Marcus couldn't tell me anything, because Marcus had finally realized what everyone else in the room now understood. He'd never had any power at all. He'd been playing with my toys and calling himself a businessman. He'd been spending my money and calling himself successful. He'd been living my life and somehow convinced himself he'd earned it. Richard Ashford stepped forward and signed as witness. Then he handed the pen to the woman standing closest to us, Margaret Chen, publisher of the city's most influential society magazine. "As a second witness?" he asked politely. Margaret Chen signed her name like she was signing a death warrant, which in a way she was. I folded the paper and put it back in my purse. Then I did something I hadn't done in 3 years of marriage. I walked away from Marcus Caldwell without looking back. Richard Ashford fell into step beside me as I moved toward the exit. Behind us, the ballroom erupted in whispers and gasps and the rapid-fire clicking of phone cameras. Tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves. "Secret heiress destroys husband at charity gala," or "The fall of Marcus Caldwell, when the wife is the real boss." "Elena," Richard said as we reached the ballroom doors, "I have a proposition for you." "I'm listening." "I'm putting together a consortium to acquire Meridian Industries. Hostile takeover. Very complicated. Very expensive. I need someone who understands how to move money without leaving fingerprints." I stopped walking and looked at him. "How complicated?" $50 billion complicated. For the first time in hours I smiled. Really smiled. "I'll have a proposal on your desk by Thursday." He grinned back. "Welcome back to the game, Princess." As we walked out of the ballroom, I could hear Marcus behind us, his voice high and desperate as he tried to explain to the remaining guests that this was all a misunderstanding, that Elena was confused, that everything would be sorted out by morning. But the damage was done. The illusion was shattered. Marcus Caldwell had been revealed as exactly what he was, a man who'd built his empire on his wife's money and his success on her silence. And silence, as I'd just proven, could be taken away as easily as it was given. The valet brought my car around. My car. Not the one I'd been sharing with Marcus. The black Mercedes I'd bought myself and had been keeping in a separate garage for emergencies. Because even when I was playing the perfect wife, even when I was stepping back and staying quiet, part of me had always known this day might come. Part of me had always been preparing for the moment when I'd need to remember how to be Elena Valdez again. I drove through the city streets with the windows down, feeling the night air against my face. Tomorrow, there would be meetings with lawyers and accountants. There would be phone calls and documents and the careful work of untangling 3 years of financial entanglement. But tonight, I was just a woman who'd remembered her own name. A woman who'd learned the difference between love and sacrifice. A woman who'd discovered that real power isn't about making noise. It's about who controls the silence. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Saw the news. Office ready for Monday. I typed back, yes, and draw up divorce papers, cite irreconcilable differences, and attach tonight's dissolution documents. 3 dots appeared then, with pleasure. Another text came in, this one from my old assistant who'd been waiting 3 years for me to call her back to work. Princess Elena rides again? I laughed out loud, alone in my car, driving through a city that was about to remember exactly who I was before I forgot myself. Elena Valdez is back in business, I typed. Hope you're ready. Born ready, see you Monday, boss. I drove home, to my real home. The penthouse I'd bought under my maiden name before I'd ever met Marcus, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like myself. Because here's what I learned that night. What I want you to understand if you're watching this and seeing pieces of your own story. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. Real power is quiet. It waits. It watches. It builds foundations while other people are busy building facades. Humiliation only works when you're actually powerless, and sometimes, the best revenge isn't screaming or crying or making a scene. Sometimes, the best revenge is letting someone destroy themselves with their own arrogance while you hold the keys to everything they think they own. Marcus thought he was the king because he sat on the throne, but I was the kingdom itself. And kingdoms don't fall just because someone changes who sits on the throne. 3 months later, Marcus filed for bankruptcy. Vivian left him for a real estate developer who actually owned his properties. The charity Gala story became a business school case study in the dangers of underestimating your financial partners. And me? I bought Meridian Industries with Richard Ashford's consortium and turned it into the most successful hostile takeover in corporate history. I restored my maiden name on all my professional documents. I hired my old assistant back and put her in charge of a team of 20. I became Elena Valdez again, the princess of venture capital, the woman who never ever loses money on an investment. And I never served drinks to anyone's mistress again. If this story made you remember your own power, if it reminded you that silence can be strategy and stepping back doesn't always mean giving up, hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their worth. And comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and whether you've ever been underestimated by someone who needed you more than they knew. Because the best revenge isn't getting even. The best revenge is becoming exactly who you were always meant to be, while the people who tried to diminish you watch from the sidelines of the life they could have shared. My name is Elena Valdez. I'm 27 years old. I'm worth approximately $4 billion, and I learned that love shouldn't cost you your name, your voice, or your power. Sometimes the princess doesn't need saving. Sometimes she just needs to remember she was never the one locked in the tower. Sometimes she was the one who owned the castle all along.